Imagine being stranded on the ocean, surrounded by death, your body falling apart, and the cure is hiding in a simple fruit. This is the true story of how a lemon saved thousands of sailors from a terrifying disease that no one understood for centuries. Dragged into the shadows, the terror of the press gangs. It was a warm evening in 1808 when Thomas Urquhart, a seasoned sailor, found himself strolling through the streets of London with his wife and sister-in-law, until a stranger's sharp demand for his name shattered the peace. Within seconds, Urquhart was surrounded, beaten, and violently dragged through the streets by men who tore the coat from his back and nearly his life with it. Only the cries of horrified passers-by saved him. But his terror was not an isolated moment, it was the brutal reality for countless seamen across the British Empire. In the dead of night, press gangs stalked the alleys and docks like wolves, snatching anyone with calloused hands and a whiff of salt air, forcing them into service for the Royal Navy. To walk freely as a sailor was to gamble with your freedom, sometimes your life. The curse beneath the waves. Had Thomas Urquhart vanished into the night with his captors, he would have awoken not just a prisoner of the Royal Navy, but of the sea itself. Years might have passed before he ever saw home again, if at all, his life spent battling storms, cannon fire, and the slow decay of forgotten men. Yet among all the perils a sailor faced, the deadliest enemy was neither man nor nature. It was the slow, gnawing hunger of scurvy. Between Columbus's voyages and the age of steam, this invisible killer claimed more than 2 million lives, rotting flesh and breaking spirits with terrifying predictability. So widespread was its reach that captains expected to lose half their crews to it before a voyage even began. Scurvy didn't just sink ships, it shaped empires, forcing rulers and explorers alike into a desperate quest for a cure that could mean the difference between triumph and ruin. Scurvy, the silent executioner of the sea. For sailors swept into the vast unknown, death came in many forms, but none more slow, agonizing, or grotesque than scurvy. What began as a strange fatigue soon transformed the body into a battlefield of rot and decay, limbs swollen and blackened, gums erupting in bloody pulp, old wounds ripping open as if time itself reversed. Sailors carved away their dying flesh with knives, rinsed their mouths with urine, and watched helplessly as comrades collapsed one by one, tossed into the sea like spoiled cargo. It was a disease so merciless that it overshadowed storms and sword fights, reducing even the strongest to helpless husks. Legendary explorers like Vasco da Gama, Magellan, and George Anson bore witness to its cruelty, Anson most tragically, as scurvy claimed hundreds of his men in a voyage meant to inspire glory. But instead, it left a trail of floating corpses and a brutal reminder. Without the mystery cure locked in citrus and unknown to most, the sea could not be conquered, it only consumed. The grandmother who hunted gold. In late 1739, as Britain and Spain clashed over control of the Caribbean, a curious figure stepped forward to lead a daring mission into the Pacific. George Anson, with his soft features and powdered curls more befitting a London matron than a naval captain, was handed an impossible task: harass the Spanish, burn their ports, seize their ships, and above all, capture the legendary silver-laden treasure galleon known as the prize of all the oceans. But from the start, Anson's mission teetered on the edge of disaster. His ships were rotting and barely seaworthy. Worse, his crew, a supposed force of 2,000, was depleted by the Royal Navy's insatiable hunger for manpower, its press gangs dragging unwilling men from the streets. Even desperation couldn't fill his ranks. As Anson prepared to set sail in 1740, he was still short hundreds of sailors, facing a journey into hostile waters with ghosts of a fleet, a fractured crew, and the weight of empire resting on his fragile shoulders. A voyage of the damned. When the Royal Navy ran out of able-bodied men for George Anson's Pacific expedition, it turned to desperation and cruelty. In a chilling move, officials emptied Chelsea Hospital, sending forth a parade of war-scarred veterans, men too old, too broken, or too lost in mind to serve on land. Many simply fled the docks upon release, leaving behind a grim company of 60- and 70-year-olds barely fit to stand, let alone sail into war. The Navy scrambled to patch the hole with boyish Marines who had never so much as fired a musket. After 6 months of chaos and starvation rations, Anson's 6 ships, crewed by the frail, the unready, and the unwanted, finally set sail. They were bound for battle, yes, but what waited in the salt-stained dark was far worse than cannon fire. This scurvy, whispered like a death sentence, had already begun its slow work. Bones would ache, flesh would rot, and before the first enemy was sighted, many would be buried at sea, victims not of Spanish bullets but of a voyage that was doomed before it ever left port. Into the mouth of madness. Armed with vinegar, sulfuric acid cocktails, and a pill better known for inducing diarrhea than curing disease, George Anson's crew set sail with hope and desperation in equal measure. But no concoction in their medicine chest could fend off the slow, merciless grip of scurvy. As their bones weakened and gums bled, the squadron reached the treacherous Cape Horn, where calm skies on March 7, 1741, offered a cruel illusion of safety. That day Anson's chaplain wrote with fragile hope, it would be the last cheerful day most would ever know. Without warning the heavens cracked open. For 3 relentless months, the fleet was battered by snow, hail, and waves so towering they seemed to threaten heaven itself. Men froze where they stood. One sailor, washed overboard, swam desperately alongside the Centurion as his shipmates watched in horror, unable to save him from the sea's cold embrace. Ships splintered, sails vanished, and death became a daily companion. By the time the storms relented in May, the fleet was shattered and scattered. The ragged crew that once limped aboard as invalids and untrained boys was now mostly gone, consumed by storm, sickness, and the unforgiving silence of the deep. Scurvy's silent slaughter. The storms had torn sails and snapped masts, but it was scurvy that truly broke Anson's fleet. By April 1741, almost no one aboard the Centurion was untouched by it. By May, death claimed them by the dozens. The decks emptied while below, the ship became a floating tomb. Hammocks sagged under the weight of men with bleeding gums, swollen limbs and blackened wounds, their moans lost in the stench of rot and rat-filled bilgewater. Some died where they lay, too fragile to be moved, their corpses swinging beside the living. Sailors watched in terror as half-century-old wounds reopened and healed bones crumbled like chalk. No medicine, no prayer could explain this nightmare. And yet, against the odds, the Centurion limped into the sanctuary of Juan Fernandez Island in June, joined by the battered Gloucester and the aptly named Trial. But the cost was staggering. Of the 1,200 souls who had once set out, only 335 remained. The rest had vanished beneath waves or withered away in silence, consumed not by war, but by a disease so cruel it could resurrect past injuries just to kill you with them all over again. The paradise that couldn't save them all. When Anson's shattered fleet finally limped ashore at Juan Fernandez Island, it wasn't victory they tasted, it was survival. For weeks, death still lingered as 6 men a day were laid into the earth, their bodies too far gone to be saved even by the island's bounty of fresh greens and miraculous sea crayfish. Slowly, painfully, the survivors clawed their way back to health on a diet of sorrel and radishes, their gums healing and their spirits rising. Anson even planted gardens for future castaways, a hopeful gesture in a voyage defined by despair. But the scurvy was never truly gone. It resurfaced on their Pacific crossing as cruel and hungry as ever, devouring more sailors and finally forcing them to burn their own ship, the Gloucester, in a drunken haze of defeat. And still Anson pressed on, against every odd. Near Canton, with just over 200 men left, he gambled everything for a shot at the legendary Spanish treasure galleon. And won. The gold returned to England, but so few of the men did. Of 2,000 who sailed with him, barely a few hundred survived. Anson may have come back a hero, but he carried home a victory soaked in the silence of the dead. Forgotten wisdom and the invisible helpers. It's almost heartbreaking to think that these sailors could have been saved by something as simple as a lemon or an orange, foods that, centuries before and after their voyage, had already proven their life-saving power, only for that knowledge to slip away time and again. From Jacques Cartier's crew sipping tea made from tree bark to the early whispers of fresh veggies as a cure, history was dotted with clues that scurvy wasn't just a random curse but a deficiency begging for a fix. What those sailors didn't know was the invisible dance inside their bodies, metabolism, a complex web of chemical reactions that keep every breath, every step, every thought alive. And running those reactions at life-sustaining speed are enzymes, tiny protein machines that rely on vitamins to get their job done. Without a steady supply of these crucial vitamins like vitamin C, those enzymes falter, the chemistry of life slows, and the body begins to break down. The tragedy of scurvy was not just the disease itself, but that the key to preventing it had been glimpsed and lost time and again, like a whispered secret in the dark. Exactly, without vitamin C, the whole critical process of making collagen breaks down, and that's why scurvy causes such catastrophic damage to connective tissues. Collagen really is the glue holding our bodies together. Skin, blood vessels, bones, everything. The lack of vitamin C essentially halts the enzymes needed to turn procollagen into functional collagen, weakening those tissues until they start falling apart. That's why sailors suffered bleeding gums, bruises, and loose teeth, signs that the structural integrity of their bodies was failing. It's fascinating and a bit tragic, How little early explorers and doctors understood about all this. They were grasping at straws, trying to explain scurvy with ideas from ancient humor theory or blaming everything from sea air to moral failings. The range of suspected causes reads like a catalog of desperation and confusion. Without knowledge of enzymes, vitamins, or even basic chemistry, it's no wonder they couldn't solve the puzzle. And vitamin C itself is a tricky one because, unlike most animals, humans can't make it internally. So it's absolutely essential to get it from diet. Its presence varies widely depending on the food. Some fruits like kiwi pack an enormous punch, while common staples like eggs or cheese have none. Even meats vary. Organ meats like liver contain it, but muscle meat does not, which would have made spotting the cause even more challenging for sailors reliant mostly on salted or preserved meats. Right. The story of vitamin C and scurvy is wild, especially how the British Navy's practical choices shaped history for better or worse. They picked limes over lemons mostly because of empire economics. They controlled Caribbean lime plantations, so limes were cheaper and more available. But limes have about half the vitamin C content of lemons or oranges, making them a less potent defense against scurvy. Even more frustratingly, how you treat the citrus matters a ton. Boiling juice down into rob sounds smart, but vitamin C is heat-sensitive and degrades quickly with heat, air exposure, bruising, or acidic reactions in copper pots. So, the cure was often weakened before it even reached sailors. James Linn's 1747 experiment aboard HMS Salisbury is a real highlight in medical history, the first controlled clinical trial. He carefully divided 12 sailors with scurvy into pairs and tested different cures, from hard cider and seawater to an odd mix of herbs and laxatives. Only the pair that got citrus, oranges and lemons, showed rapid improvement, so much so that their symptoms faded in days. Yet ironically, even Lynn didn't immediately change naval policy. His discovery got buried for years because old medical theories and bureaucracy resisted change. The Navy wouldn't adopt citrus as a standard scurvy treatment until the early 19th century, long after Lynn's work. This is such a fascinating and frustrating chapter of medical history. Lynn's experiment was a breakthrough, but his own follow-up showed how even the discoverer can fail to grasp the full importance of their findings. He ran a pioneering controlled trial, yet his detailed 400-page treatise of the scurvy buried the citrus cure deep inside, barely highlighting it. Instead of focusing on the clear evidence that citrus rapidly cured scurvy, Lind clung to outdated humoral theories, believing blocked sweat glands were the real cause. His cautious language about lemon juice being one remedy among many diluted the impact of what should have been a game-changing discovery. Yet progress marched on, painfully slow but steady. By the late 18th century, as navies expanded and scurvy remained a massive threat, practical minds like Gilbert Blaine pushed lemon juice into standard naval rations. This shift arguably altered history by enabling the British Royal Navy to maintain a decades-long blockade of the English Channel, a critical strategic advantage against Napoleon's forces. It's a striking reminder of how scientific truths can be hidden in plain sight and how real-world pressures, like military necessity, often drive adoption of effective solutions when pure science or logic alone might fail. The battle against scurvy is a vivid reminder that sometimes life-saving knowledge can be hidden in the simplest things, and that history's greatest lessons often come with a bitter taste of forgotten truths. So next time you peel a lemon, remember, it once saved lives on the high seas, changing the course of history forever.